So the Mythosaur is real, and its introduction actually brought a necessary injection of intrigue into Season 3 of The Mandalorian, but there are still a bunch of questions up in the air about what's coming next for this show, and with that, I wanted to highlight the positives about the second and third episode that really caught my attention before giving my takes on what's falling flat for me this season. If you enjoyed today's video, you might also enjoy the other Star Wars content here on the channel, so go check them out. In hindsight, I'm not entirely sure what the purpose of episode 1 was, as it very awkwardly dropped us back into this world without much of a recap, but even more so, it just feels so drastically different in its tone compared to the following chapters for Season 3. The Apostate was mid-season filler with a lot of lull time and very little in its story pulling it forward, but the Minds of Mandalore quickly became one of the more interesting episodes in this show's lifespan by getting back to what made the show interesting: the lore. Even if it didn't accomplish much from a narrative point of view, we leaned heavily into the lore of Mandalore with some prequel-era flavoring that did wonders for the vibe of this season. But we can't dive into anything about the Minds of Mandalore without addressing the cinematography of this episode, because my God, this season is off to a good start. The wide shots and silent spans are doing wonders for the atmosphere of Mando's situation, as well as emphasizing the marketed tension of Season 3. You can really see the passion behind the frames, and the world building is simply thriving off of it, all thanks to Rachel Morrison's directing and eye for cinematography. This lore-filled chapter in the Mandalorian saga is just what the show needed, and it's getting a lens of polish that helps reinforce the mythical side of the universe. From the halls of Mandalore and slow descent into the mines to the fascinating spider crab that seemed to be piloted by a Dianoga, which we haven't seen since A New Hope, there was a lot to sink into with this episode. The atmosphere of Mandalore hasn't been explored enough, and using Bo-Katan as a vessel for storytelling while in her old home was a really nice touch for this episode. We also see the clear distinction and gap in skill level between Din's fighting style and Bo's mastery of her surroundings, which led way to her gaining possession of the Darksaber to rescue Din from this Grievous-like droid, bringing up the question of whether or not she now has earned its ownership after kind of winning it in combat, but that is a new thread that hopefully will be addressed and should be, and is a welcomed layer to the relationship between Din Djarin and Bo-Katan. Just a quick touch on that spider crab though, because I'm sure I wasn't the only one who thought of General Grievous during this scene, from the extra arms and the sounds it was making. Even if it wasn't intentional, it was just a nice little homage to our old general and a nice homage to the prequels. Again, the notes of the prequels were layered throughout this episode, and it went a long way to creating more mystery for Din and Bo to play around in. With Bo-Katan's presence in Din's story, we're getting a lot of connective tissue to the prequels era, which is great because not only are those the movies I love, but it's bringing some needed shades of color into the story to give the show an additional vibrant flair. Speaking of vibrance, we finally get to see Bo-Katan's ship, the Gauntlet, in action, and I can't lie, it gave me some chills even if for just a brief moment. It hasn't been in use much since the Clone Wars, and the urgency of her mission from Kalevala to the descent into Mandalore really brought me back to the feelings I had during some of those great Clone Wars episodes, which helped my investment in this season. It all just felt so Star Wars-y, and that's a nice touch. It's clear there's an intent to embrace the lore that's available from past Star Wars stories, as well as welcoming the extended universe, which has so much to pull from. Speaking of, the Mythosaur's big reveal at the end of this episode was an awesome surprise. Not only does it now mean Bo has to wrestle with conflicting ideologies, but it injects that missing mythical feel of Star Wars back into Star Wars. The Mythosaur is an excellent addition to the live-action canon, and bringing in a legendary creature like this will really create a unique variable for Din Djarin and Bo-Katan's relationship, as it quite literally ties into their heritage and their place in the galaxy. Also, any legendary creature that's underwater with a whole backstory of important lore attached to it is automatically 10 times cooler, so good job showrunners. This all then bleeds into the immediate pickup with episode 3, The Convert, where we get a really exciting opening 10 minutes of Bo and Din wiping out an invading interceptor squad before jumping into hyperspace, but that's unfortunately where my enjoyment with these two episodes ends, because what follows, while interesting in its own lesser degree, is not at all the story that I think needed to take precedent over Din and Bo's conflict. Look, it's very clear one of two things is happening right now with Season 3. Either The Mandalorian is being used to fix the mess of the sequel trilogy, which, in my opinion, is a mistake, or we are setting up Thrawn as the big bad moving forward. On one hand, this would explain the jarring interjection of Dr. Pershing's cloning program into the mix, but also where the extra interceptor squad came from after Bo's castle was destroyed following her ascent out of Mandalore. This is where I get into some conflicting waters with this show. I've said my piece on Baby Yoda and bringing it back too early, but the idea of season 3, as far as what we were marketed, was this big reinvention plot for Mando and using Mandalore as the crux of that transformation. The stakes were between Din and Bo-Katan, and while giving her a new story around conflicting traditions is really good, I can't help but feel like the entire purpose of this season was just summed up in 2 episodes, and now we don't know where to go from here. The stakes moving forward now have to come from the story itself, and since we know Bo and Mando are safe and they've resolved the intrigue of reinvention behind Din Djarin, the story that remains for the moment isn't drawing me in any meaningful way. I know we still have a few episodes to go and anything is on the table, but I just feel a complete lack of tension or real weight behind what I'm watching, given that the whole redemption period was centered around Mandalore and has been completely wrapped up in 3 episodes. With that said, maybe this is all leading to Thrawn, from the attack on Bo's castle to the reinforcements that are mounting out in the galaxy, but that through line for that narrative is blurry at best and hasn't been reinforced in any meaningful way in any episode prior, thus leaving me confused and struggling to continue to care about The Mandalorian. The plot for season 3 has changed so many times, from needing to get IG-11 and IG-11 only so that we can explore Mandalore, to ignoring that completely with a new droid, to the redemption of Din Djarin being resolved immediately, to eventually mending his relationship with Bo-Katan, all of this just kind of happening as it happens. Bo-Katan is the most interesting character currently in this show, which is a good thing, but it does make me ask, what now? What is the point of this season if there really isn't an overarching plot or any real scenes other than tensionless fights or dialogue that gets us from walking in one place to walking in another? I haven't gone into these first 3 episodes expecting groundbreaking writing, because that's not exactly what The Mandalorian is about, but so far it does feel like the team behind The Mandalorian doesn't exactly have a plan for this season or why season 3 should exist in the first place. The writing isn't really carrying the interactions, the plot changes from episode to episode, and the introduction of this New Republic storyline seems to be less about exploring the intricacies of Operation Paperclip, as it seems to be about salvaging the remnants of the sequel trilogy, which for me is just a big turnoff. I've tried looking at The Mandalorian as a live-action adaptation of something we would get in Rebels or Clone Wars, which does help with the episodic nature, but I can't shake this feeling that Star Wars is now using The Mandalorian as nothing more than an opportunity to set things up, rather than actually exploring Din Djarin or giving him unique things to do, especially with his relationship with Bo-Katan. Right now, Season 3 doesn't seem to have a real plot, and instead it's appearing to be hijacked in an effort to salvage the sequels or introduce Thrawn. While the visuals have been great, and I've really enjoyed Bo-Katan's story so far, everything else is feeling a bit hollow, and I hope the remaining episodes are able to turn this thing around. Otherwise, I think we may be in for one of the more disappointing seasons of television in a while. All in all, I find myself with less investment moving forward this season than when the trailers first dropped. Grogu's absence left a lot on the table, and the idea of focusing on Din Djarin's story around Mandalore was the deep dive I had hoped stayed throughout the entirety of Season 3, especially when it comes to relating that back into Bo-Katan. With how quickly it seems everything has been resolved, I just don't know what other legs Mandalorian has to stand on, because outside of Bo and some legacy characters that pop up every now and then, there isn't much here in terms of substance, and I don't think the show can keep getting away with filler episodes or really mediocre plot points. I do hope I'm wrong, but I gotta say I'm less than eager to tune in this week for what is rumored to be the shortest episode yet. I hope things turn the corner, but as of right now, I just don't know where Season 3 is going, and I don't think Mando does either. And as always, thanks for watching.